The iron gates of the Edmund estate greeted Sofia with a screech that sounded like the house itself had chronic tonsillitis. She paused, gripping the handle of her suitcase, and looked up at the facade. It was a grand but exhausted structure. The faded stucco resembled wrinkles on the face of an aging aristocrat, and the twisted chimneys stared into the sky with silent reproach. "Well, Sophie, welcome to the aesthetic depression zone," she muttered under her breath. Sophia had always dreamed of something big. Inheriting an estate like this was her chance to turn a neglected ruin into an elite wedding venue. She could already picture. The iron gates of the Edmund estate greeted Sofia with a screech that sounded like the house itself had chronic tonsillitis. She paused, gripping the handle of her suitcase, and looked up at the facade. It was a grand but exhausted structure. The faded stucco resembled wrinkles on the face of an aging aristocrat, and the twisted chimneys stared into the sky with silent reproach. "Well, Sophie, welcome to the aesthetic depression zone," she muttered under her breath. Sophia had always dreamed of something big. Inheriting an estate like this was her chance to turn a neglected ruin into an elite wedding venue. She could already picture perfectly trimmed lawns and brides in silk. But inside, it didn't smell like roses. It smelled like dust, dampness, and something sour, as if someone had left a century-old lemon in a drawer. "Are you the owner?" A voice rang out so suddenly that Sophia nearly dropped her keys. A man stepped out from the depths of the dark hall. He wore dusty jeans and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing tanned forearms with clearly defined veins. He held a tape measure and looked as if the house personally belonged to him. "I'm Mark, the architect," he said, offering his hand. Sophia noticed traces of graphite and confidence on his palms. "Your trustees hired me to assess the structure. Honestly, this house is being held together by sheer willpower and the stubbornness of ghosts." Sophia held his gaze. His eyes were the color of strong espresso. "I'm Sophia, and I'm hoping architectural confidence will win over ghostly stubbornness." They walked into the central living room. A massive chandelier hung from the ceiling, covered in cobwebs like a bridal veil. At that very moment, in the shadows behind a heavy velvet curtain, he awoke. Count Edmund didn't remember how long he had been dead, but he clearly remembered having impeccable taste in life. The moment he saw Mark, the ghost felt a strange, long-forgotten tremor in his ectoplasm. Those shoulders, that profile. Edmund floated closer, hovering beneath the ceiling. He wanted to declare something grand like, "Leave my domain, mortal," or perhaps bow in aristocratic greeting. But Edmund forgot about his curse. The instant his feelings for Mark flared up like dry straw, the ectoplasm in the lower half of his ghostly body began to contract. Pooh! The sound echoed through the entire room. It was loud, rolling, and unbelievably long, as if someone had ripped an old sail right next to the hero's ears. Sophia froze. Her face instantly turned crimson. "Oh, God," she breathed, staring at her sneakers. Mark slowly raised an eyebrow, shifting his gaze from the chandelier to Sophia. "You know," he said, calmly, hiding his irony, "I've read that in old houses, pressure changes in the pipes can force air out, but for it to come out with such expression—" "It wasn't me," Sophia blurted far too quickly. "Of course," Mark said with the faintest smile, hiding his irony. "Must have been termites having a pea soup party." Edmund, hovering under the ceiling, was ready to sink straight through the floor into hell itself. He had wanted to appear like a demonic lover, and instead he had sounded like a malfunctioning car horn. From sheer embarrassment, a faint greenish mist formed around him. "By the way," Mark added, sniffing the air, "do you smell that? Like someone just set off a firecracker in an antique shop." Sophia realized her first meeting with the man of her dreams had just become the most humiliating moment of her life. And Edmund, watching Mark bend over his blueprints again, showing off perfect posture, felt another wave of tenderness. His stomach, or whatever remained of it, betrayed him with another ominous gurgle. The night at the Edmund estate turned out to be even less welcoming than the day. The darkness here was thick as old jam, and it seemed to have weight of its own. Sofia lay in the former master bedroom on a canopy bed that smelled of mothballs and lost hopes. Somewhere in the neighboring wing, Mark had spread out his sleeping bag right on the floor among his blueprints. He had insisted on staying, citing the unstable condition of the floors, though Sofia suspected he was simply curious to observe the termites that sounded like a brass band. Edmund hovered above Sofia like a piece of storm cloud. His jealousy boiled. This girl, with her pink pajamas and plans for a wedding business, offended his aristocratic sense of beauty. And worst of all, she prevented him from peacefully admiring Mark. "Now you'll learn what real horror is, you petty bourgeois," Edmund hissed, though to Sofia it sounded like nothing more than a faint rustle of curtains. He decided to act in a classic manner, appear in the mirror as a mutilated corpse, wailing with otherworldly agony. Sofia had just gotten up to go to the kitchen for some water. She approached a large vanity mirror stained by time. Edmund focused all his will, trying to materialize his face, stern, monumental, like in Boy-Chuckist paintings, with deep shadows and a severe gaze. But the moment he saw Sofia's reflection, looking far too cute with her messy hair, his ectoplasm betrayed him again. The strain of trying to become visible shifted elsewhere. "Truck-tut-tut-tut-ta!" burst from the mirror, as if a malfunctioning Maxim machine gun had started firing inside it. Sofia jumped back, nearly knocking over the nightstand. "What is this?" she cried. Quick footsteps sounded in the hallway. Mark rushed into the room holding a powerful flashlight. The beam sliced through the darkness, sweeping across the corners. "Sofia? What happened? I heard, was that the pipe pressure again? Because this time it sounds like the pipes have launched an offensive." Sofia stood with her hands pressed to her chest. "Mark, I'm not joking. I think someone was in the mirror, and it was shooting sounds." Mark stepped closer. He looked sleepy but unbelievably attractive in his simplicity. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and Sofia felt her panic dissolve into his calm. "You're just overtired. Old houses have strange acoustics. Let me sit with you until you fall asleep." Edmund, who at that moment was trying to hide behind a curtain, nearly exploded with rage. They were standing so close. Mark was holding her shoulder. The ghost decided to take radical action. He would extinguish Mark's flashlight, plunge them into total darkness, and scare them both senseless. He flew toward the flashlight, focused energy in his fingers, and at that exact moment, Mark absent-mindedly touched Sofia's hair, brushing it aside. That small moment of intimacy struck the ghostly aristocrat so deeply that his jet engine fired at full power. Boom! Poof! The sound was so powerful that the heavy velvet curtain Edmund had been hiding behind shot upward and collapsed over Mark and Sofia, covering them from head to toe. Instead of screams of terror, Edmund heard muffled laughter. Under the curtain, tangled in fabric, Sofia and Mark tried to free themselves. "This isn't pipes anymore, Mark," Sofia laughed, struggling in the cloth. "It's some ghost drummer with meteorism." "Well, at least we're warm now. And this is the weirdest date of my life, but I kind of like it." They emerged from the curtain, and Sofia, still laughing, instinctively leaned against Mark. He didn't hurry to step away.
Edmund hovered under the ceiling, green with shame and fury. His attempts to frighten the girl turned an ordinary evening into a romantic adventure. He realized petty mischief wouldn't work. If he wanted Mark for himself, he would need something more serious. Much more serious. You still don't know what a dead man's broken heart can be capable of, Sofia, he thought, and at that exact moment, the room suddenly grew truly cold.
Mark was already on his feet. He stood in the middle of the living room, having spread a huge estate utility map across an old chest. He looked focused and unbelievably sexy. The sunlight highlighted the line of his jaw, and the pencil clenched between his teeth gave him the air of a sort of rebel engineer. "The coffee machine works about as well as the ghosts here," he said without turning around. "Makes a lot of noise, 0 results. Had to brew it in a mug. Want some?" "Thanks." Sofia stepped closer, breathing in the aroma of coffee and something else. "Mark, you did notice the pipes weren't just humming last night, they were reacting to us." Mark spat the pencil into his hand and looked at her seriously. "Sofia, I'm an architect. I believe in rebar, concrete, and calculations. But honestly, pipes don't know how to play jazz, and what we heard last night sounded like a drunk saxophonist improvising." While they talked, Edmund hovered right behind Mark. He was so close he could have felt the warmth of his body if he'd had nerve endings. The ghost closed his eyes, imagining placing his hands on those broad shoulders. In his mind, it was a scene from a classic novel. He, a majestic count, Mark, a talented master, their souls merging in otherworldly ecstasy. Edmund sighed deeply, his heart overflowing. "Freed?" came a thin, gentle sound right near Mark's armpit. Mark jerked his arm as if stung by a wasp. "What the hell? I swear I felt a breeze." Sofia narrowed her eyes. Her gaze landed on the wall between 2 windows where a dark, time-stained portrait hung. She walked over and wiped dust off it with her sleeve. "Look," she whispered. A man stared back at them from the canvas. The portrait was painted in a strange, monumental style. Sharp lines, heavy forms, a face like a mask carved from stone. It was Boychokism in its purest form, stern beauty, rhythmic composition, and a gaze that seemed to pierce straight through you. Beneath the portrait, in gold letters, was written, "Count Edmund, 1892 to 1924. Misunderstood by the world, faithful to beauty." "He looks gloomy," Mark remarked, stepping closer behind her. And judging by that expression, he was already having digestive issues back then. Hearing this, Edmund nearly fell out of the air. Digestive issues? He, a refined aesthete, a man who had perfumes shipped in from Paris in his lifetime? Rage flared in him, stronger than love. He flew at the portrait and tried to shove it, to scare this ignorant architect. He pushed the frame with all his might. Crash! Pff, dring! The portrait didn't just sway, it flew off its nail, accompanied by such a powerful sound effect that the crystal pendants on the chandelier began to ring. Mark barely managed to catch the heavy frame above the floor. "Whoa, heavy guy," he said, breathing hard. But Sofia wasn't looking at the portrait anymore. She was staring at the niche in the wall that had been hidden behind it. Inside the small recess lay a little leather notebook. A diary. Sofia reached in and picked it up. The paper was dry and brittle. She opened the first page. "Day 412 of my solitude. Beauty is a curse. Every time I see a perfect line or feel a surge of passion, my spirit betrays me with an unworthy sound. This is the spell of the old witch from the foothills. She said that until I find someone who will love my noise, I will remain trapped between worlds." Sofia slowly lifted her eyes to Mark. "It's not the pipes, Mark. It's him, and he's here right now." Mark opened his mouth to object, but at that moment the air in the room grew heavy, and that same greenish mist began to swirl around them. Edmund realized his secret was out, but instead of fleeing, he felt relief. He hovered right in front of them, becoming almost visible for a moment, the majestic figure from the portrait, though with a slightly guilty expression. "So you're the farting count?" Mark asked sincerely, looking the ghost straight in the eyes. In response came a short, almost affirmative, "Poomp?" Sofia felt a chill run down her spine. She understood. Edmund didn't just want to drive them away. He was looking at Mark with such longing that it was clear this wasn't just haunting, it was supernatural stalking. "He doesn't want us to leave," Sofia said, gripping the diary tighter. "He doesn't want me to leave. And you, Mark, he wants you." Suddenly, all the doors in the living room slammed shut at once, and this time the sound was remarkably clean, no extra effects. Edmund had stopped being embarrassed. He had started taking action. Evening fell over the estate, bringing with it the smell of damp earth and a sense of impending disaster. Sofia decided the best way to deal with a rival ghost was to ignore his existence and focus on the living object of her affection. She took a silk dress the color of ripe cherries out of her suitcase, lit the surviving candles in a massive candelabrum, and set the table in the small dining hall. "If he wants war, he'll get it," she muttered, placing plates of Italian pasta she had somehow managed to cook on the old stove. "But first, I'm feeding the architect." Mark arrived for dinner in a clean shirt, slightly damp after a quick wash. His hair was tousled and his eyes held a mix of exhaustion and genuine interest. "Sofia, this looks incredible," he said, looking over the table. "I'd almost forgotten food doesn't have to come from a plastic container. But are you sure we should be sitting here? The farting count doesn't seem to be in a great mood. I saw a kitchen drawer full of knives open by itself." "Edmund just wants attention," Sofia replied confidently, pouring wine into crystal glasses. "He's an aristocrat, Mark. He wouldn't stoop to a vulgar murder during dinner. That would be bad etiquette." Edmund, who was hovering just under the ceiling at that moment, nearly choked on his own ectoplasm at such audacity. Bad etiquette? In life, he had caused scenes that made the newspapers. His gaze fell on Mark, who was hungrily twirling pasta around his fork. The ghost felt such a surge of tenderness that his transparent body began to vibrate. Mark looked so manly, so solid. Edmund could not allow this red-haired girl with her Italian noodles to claim his treasure. He slowly drifted down like fog beneath the table. He knew Sofia was trying to appear delicate and refined. Well then, time to shatter that illusion. "You know, Mark," Sofia began, gracefully raising her wine glass to her lips, "this house has such potential. Once we finish the renovations, it'll be the perfect place for people in love." A loud, juicy, unbelievably long sound erupted from directly beneath Sofia's chair. Sofia froze. The wine trembled in her glass. Mark slowly lowered his fork. "Sofia?" he asked, looking at her with deep sympathy. "It wasn't me," she cried, her voice breaking into a high pitch. "Mark, you know it's him. It's Edmund." "Of course," Mark nodded, though doubt flickered in his eyes. "Of course it's the ghost. But the sound was so localized, right under your silk." Edmund was triumphant. He floated up to Sofia's ear and released another short but very convincing burst. Bzz-ding. "Mark!" Sofia jumped to her feet. "He's doing it on purpose. He wants you to think that I have digestive issues." "Sofia, calm down," Mark said, standing as well, trying to be gentle. "I understand. You're nervous, old food, stress. It's natural. Even if it was you, I wouldn't judge, though I must admit the acoustics in this hall do give things a certain dramatic flair." "It's not me." Sofia was on the verge of tears from humiliation. "Do you see that green mist around my legs? That's him. He's mocking me." Feeling his plan working, Edmund decided to deliver a final blow. He concentrated all his ghostly energy and unleashed a cascade of sounds that resembled an artillery barrage during a national holiday. Boom! The force made the cable jump slightly, and one of the candles went out. The air filled with the smell of ozone and something like very old, moldy perfume mixed with sulfur. Mark coughed, covering his nose with his hand. You know, Sofia, maybe I should go check the, foundation. The air in here has become a bit too rich with history. He quickly left the dining hall, leaving Sofia alone with the darkness and her invisible enemy. You monster! Sofia shouted into the emptiness. Edmund materialized in front of her. His Boychikist-style face, massive chin, deep-set eye sockets glowed with smug satisfaction. He couldn't speak, but his expression clearly said, "He's mine. You don't belong here." Sofia clenched her fists. Her shame hardened into cold fury. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "You're just a disgusting noise, and I will find a way to switch you off." She turned and stormed towards the library. She needed that diary. Somewhere in there had to be the weakness of this aristocratic prankster. And Edmund, left alone in the hall, let out a quiet, victorious poomph and began preparing a new plan. He realized simply embarrassing the girl wasn't enough. He needed to make Mark want to get rid of her himself. Every line had been written in perfect calligraphy that grew more and more chaotic toward the end of the pages. Sofia read the confessions of a man whose life had been twisted by beauty and physiology. August 14th, 1923. Julian came again. His hands were covered in cement dust, his shirt clinging to his shoulders from the heat. He is a god of stone and lime. When he unrolls the blueprints for the new orangery, I feel a fire blooming in my chest. But the moment I try to speak even a word of my feelings, the witch's curse reminds me of itself. Instead of poetry, a loud sound of emptiness. Julian laughs, thinking it's the old furniture, and I flee to the garden, cursing my love and my intestines. Sofia leaned back in the chair. "Oh God," she whispered. "Julian, he wasn't just his architect, he was his love." She turned the page. There was a pencil sketch, a portrait of Julian. Sofia's breath caught. The man in the drawing had the same strong profile, the same tousled curls, the same ironic smile as Mark. Edmund hadn't just fallen for Mark. He had seen in him the reincarnation of the only meaning his earthly life had ever had. Suddenly, the air in the library vibrated. Sofia felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. A long, distorted shadow fell across the diary page. Pfft. A quiet, almost sorrowful sound came near her ear. Edmund materialized over the desk. This time, he didn't look furious. He gazed at Julian's drawing with such longing that for a moment Sofia felt sorry for him. His transparent hands tried to touch the paper, but passed through it, leaving only a faint trace of frost. "You love him," Sofia said, looking straight into the ghost's eyes. "You see Julian in Mark, but Mark is not Julian, Edmund. He's a living person, and he will never be yours." The ghost jerked his head up. His eyes flared with cold blue fire. He made a sound like a struck gong, accompanied by a sharp burst of ectoplasm. Boom! A candlestick flew off the table, and the library plunged into darkness. "Sofia, where are you?" Mark's voice came from the corridor. He rushed into the library with a flashlight. The beam caught scattered books, and Sofia clutching the diary to her chest. "Mark, I figured it out. He's not just a ghost. He's in love with you. He thinks you're his Julian from a century ago. All those sounds, that's his way of confessing." Mark stopped, shifting his gaze from Sofia to the empty corner where Edmund had just stood. He slowly ran a hand over his face. "Sofia, listen, I get it.
This house is awful. It's cold and something is constantly, making noises. But the theory about a gay ghost who farts out of love for my blueprints is a bit much even for my sense of humor. But look at this drawing. She shoved the diary under his nose. Mark glanced briefly at the sketch and shrugged. It's just a typical portrait of a man from that era. Could even be my great-grandfather. He was a builder, too. But that doesn't mean a dead count wants to take me on a date. Sofia, you need rest. You're starting to hallucinate. At that moment, Edmund, deeply offended that his love had been dismissed as a hallucination, decided to act decisively. He flew invisibly up to Mark and began gently, in his opinion, stroking his back. But since the Count's emotions were off the charts, his defect kicked into rapid-fire mode. Pfra, 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 tra. The sounds echoed right behind Mark's back, as if someone invisible were playing drums on his jacket. Mark froze, his eyes widened. Okay, he said slowly, that was very close. Very. But I still think it's a draft in the chimney. A draft does not stroke your shoulders, Mark, Sofia shouted. Edmund, frustrated by the architect's skepticism, decided to change tactics. If Mark wouldn't believe in love, he would believe in death. He realized that as long as Sofia was here, Mark would keep searching for logical explanations. She was his anchor to reality, and that anchor had to be cut. Edmund's gaze settled on a heavy oak wardrobe that stood on rotting legs directly behind the girl.
"Mark, the lights went out again," Sofia shouted, fumbling for her phone in her pocket. The weak beam of her flashlight caught nothing but clouds of dust. "I'm in the greenhouse. Check the main breaker in the basement," the architect's voice echoed from somewhere far away. Sofia swallowed hard. The basement was the last place she wanted to go, but the thought of spending another night in the dark with Edmund scared her more. She pulled open the heavy door leading downstairs. The steps groaned beneath her feet as if warning her of danger. Edmund was already waiting. He hovered beneath the low, vaulted basement ceiling, focused like a surgeon before an operation. His jealousy had reached its peak. Earlier that day, he had seen Mark help Sofia brush cobwebs out of her hair, his hand lingering at the back of her head a second longer than politeness required. This ends now, the Count thought. The moment Sofia stepped onto the last stair, Edmund made his move. He didn't just swing the door, he slammed it so hard the bolt snapped shut from the other side. Sofia grabbed the handle and pulled. Useless. "Mark, this isn't funny," she yelled, but the stone walls swallowed her voice. Edmund began his dance of death. He knew that as a ghost, he couldn't simply strangle her with his hands, but he could concentrate his ectoplasm, turning it into a dense, poisonous mist. He strained, trying to squeeze every ounce of dark energy out of himself to fill the cramped space. But the witch's curse had no mercy. The stronger his intent to do evil, the more intense the physiological response. Perf, poomf, brat-ta-ta-ta-ta. Instead of silent, deadly gas, the basement filled with a barrage of sounds like explosions at a rubber duck factory. From the effort, Edmund turned bright purple. He glowed in the darkness like a gigantic malfunctioning strip club sign. Sofia, who had been bracing herself for death, froze. She saw the purple glow. In its light, she noticed that one brick in the wall stuck out differently than the others. From the vibrations created by Edmund's artillery blasts, the brick began to loosen. You are literally a walking disaster, Edmund," Sofia breathed, stepping toward the wall. She pulled the brick free, revealing a niche behind it. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a silver box. At that moment, the basement door burst open. Mark had smashed it in with his shoulder, a crowbar in his hands. "Sofia, are you alive? I don't know what I heard, but it sounded like the start of World War III.
He rushed down and caught the girl just as she nearly collapsed from a mix of fear and hysterical laughter. "Mark, look," she said, holding up the box. "He helped again. He wanted to scare me so badly, he shook treasure out of the wall." Mark looked at the fading purple mist slowly dissolving near the ceiling, which let out one last quiet, embarrassed poof. "You know what?" Mark said, pulling Sofia close. "I'm starting to think this ghost is our best ally, like a very noisy, very weird guardian angel." He gently kissed her forehead. Sofia closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his body. From the corner, Edmund watched, feeling his ectoplasmic heart tear into pieces. He hadn't just lost, he had become Cupid for his own enemy. His hatred twisted into something far more dangerous. He understood now. As long as he remained outside, he was powerless. He needed a body. He needed hers. "If you won't leave on your own," Edmund thought, "I'll take your life from the inside." Night arrived with a thunderstorm that seemed personally commissioned by Edmund. Lightning tore across the sky above the estate, illuminating its sharp spires like the skeleton of some gigantic beast. Sofia slept restlessly, clutching the edge of her blanket. She dreamed of a garden filled with white lilies and a man standing with his back to her. But every time he began to turn around, his face blurred into a swirl of green mist. Edmund had been waiting for this moment. He hovered above her, spread out in the air like a massive bat. He felt every one of her breaths. For him, this wasn't just revenge. It was a chance to feel the weight of his own hand again, the warmth of skin, and most importantly, to touch Mark not with ghostly cold, but with living flesh. "Sorry, my dear, but this seat is taken," he whispered. He began to sink down. It felt like diving into icy water. Edmund sensed the resistance of her soul, but his jealousy was stronger. He seeped through her pores, filling every cell with himself. Sofia gasped sharply, her body arching off the bed as her eyes flew open. They were no longer brown. In the depths of her pupils burned a cold, aristocratic silver. Morning greeted Mark with a strange sight. Sofia, or what remained of her, sat at the table in the living room. She was no longer in her usual pajamas. Somehow she had dug up an old high-collared dress from the estate's wardrobes, one that smelled of centuries and formaldehyde. She sat with a perfectly straight back, holding her cup of coffee as if it were the Holy Grail. "Sofia," Mark stopped in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "You look like a character from a vampire movie. Everything okay?" She slowly turned her head. Her gaze was heavy, commanding. "Mark, my dear architect," she said. The voice was hers, but the intonations belonged to someone accustomed to giving orders to servants. "I have never felt better. This house has finally accepted me. Don't you think today is the perfect day to forget about foundations and devote ourselves to beauty?" She stood and began moving slowly toward him. Mark instinctively took a step back. This new Sofia radiated such wild energy that the air itself seemed to smell like ozone. "Sofia, you're kind of scaring me," Mark laughed, but it came out strained. "Where's your oat milk coffee and your ghost jokes?" Inside her, Edmund was triumphant. He stepped right up to Mark, breathing in the scent of his skin, coffee, wood, and rain. He raised a hand to brush a finger along his cheek. This was meant to be the ultimate romantic tension. "You can't imagine how long I've waited to say this to you," Sofia whispered. But the instant Edmund felt that surge of pure, concentrated love for Mark, Sofia's physiology reacted immediately. The curse hadn't disappeared. It had simply found a new instrument. Pfr, pumph. The sound was so sharp, Sofia's body actually jolted. Mark froze. His fingers, which had been reaching to take her hand, twitched midair. "Oh," he managed, "I guess last night's pasta was a bit much." "It's not Edmund tried to protest from inside her, but jealousy and passion kept boiling over. Brat-ta-ta-ta-ta. Bzz-ding. Her body produced a whole series of sounds like a malfunctioning drum roll. Mark finally cracked and took 2 more steps back. Sofia, I really appreciate your new aristocratic communication style, but maybe you should take some medicine or just spend some time alone with your, inner world. He turned quickly and almost fled into the library. Edmund, inside Sofia's body, stood in the middle of the room with fists clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. His face twisted with rage. He understood now. Even with a body, he couldn't defeat the curse. Every expression of his love turned into farce. "She's to blame," he hissed in Sofia's voice. "This body mocks my love. If I can't be with him as a woman, then I'll make sure he stays with me forever in another world." His gaze shifted towards the staircase leading down to the old crypt. A plan of murder and suicide began to ripen in his clouded mind.
Sofia, this isn't funny anymore. What treasure? What final truth? Mark stopped beside a massive pink marble sarcophagus. There's nothing here but dust and your ancestors, who, judging by the atmosphere, aren't thrilled about visitors. Sofia slowly turned around. In the half-dark, her face looked like a perfectly carved sculpture. Edmund inside her savored the moment. He could feel the heart beating beneath the girl's delicate ribs, frantic, terrified, but alive. The real Sofia was somewhere deep inside her own mind, screaming and pounding on locked doors, but the ghost held control with an iron grip. "Treasure isn't gold, Mark," she whispered, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "Treasure is eternity. Don't you see? This world is too filthy for beauty like ours. Come with me. 1 step into the darkness, and we'll be together where there is no time, no cement, and no obstacles." She stepped right up to him. Mark felt the cold radiating from her skin. He was beginning to understand. This was not the girl he'd laughed with under velvet curtains. "Edmund?" he asked quietly. "Is that you in there? Get out of her. This isn't your life." "It is now," Sofia cried, madness flashing in her eyes. She grabbed Mark by the lapels of his jacket, trying to drag him toward the edge of an open wall niche where the Count himself had once been meant to rest. "1 kiss, Mark, 1 kiss, and I'll take your soul with me." She lunged for his lips. Her intent was deadly, an ectoplasmic strike meant to stop the architect's heart at the peak of emotional tension. Edmund gathered all his otherworldly power, preparing for the final blow. But Sofia's body had its own opinion about that plan. Inside, the real Sofia found the only weapon available to her, a sense of absurdity. She remembered how ridiculous Edmund had looked earlier flying around like a punctured balloon, and the memory triggered hysterical laughter deep within her mind. That laughter resonated with the Count's curse. "Pop, pop, pop, fur!" The sound was so powerful, it literally lifted Sofia's body a few centimeters off the ground. It wasn't just a sound, it was a true acoustic blast. Old plaster rained from the crypt ceiling, and a bat sleeping in the corner dropped to the floor, completely disoriented. Mark, knocked back by the wave of aristocratic air, fell to his knees. "Oh my God," he coughed. "Sofia, that was like a gas explosion." Inside the girl, Edmund roared in fury. He tried to attack again, attempting to shove Mark deeper into the crypt. His hatred and passion blended into one lethal cocktail. "Die with me," Sofia screamed. But Sofia inside refused to give up. She started recalling the most ridiculous moments of their acquaintance. Each memory triggered another wave of sound effects. Bra-ta-ta-ta, biz-ding, pump-fart. Her body began convulsing in rhythmic spasms, unleashing a barrage that an entire artillery regiment might envy. Mark watched in mix of horror and awe. "Sofia, fight him, push him out through, well, you know how," he shouted. Edmund felt himself being forced out. His ectoplasm couldn't hold inside a body that had turned into a vibrating musical instrument. The curse he had brought with him became his personal exorcist. With one final, impossibly long and musical fit boom, Sofia arched backward, and a thick green cloud burst from her mouth. Edmund was literally blasted out of her. He hovered under the crypt ceiling, confused, purple with shame, and completely powerless. Sofia collapsed into Mark's arms, breathing hard. I did it?" she whispered. You were incredible," Mark replied, wiping tears of laughter and dust from his face. "I never thought flatulence could be so heroic." Above them, Edmund let out a quiet, sorrowful sound like the creak of an old door and began to fade rapidly. But the real surprise was still waiting for him.
"Let's get out of here," Mark whispered, lifting Sofia into his arms. "This house has drunk enough of our blood and our nerves." They stepped out into the yard. The storm had passed, leaving behind only the damp scent of ozone and fresh grass. The first rays of dawn began slicing through the mist, illuminating the garden Sofia had dreamed of turning into a wedding paradise. Edmund flew out after them through the broken basement window. He couldn't remain inside. The emptiness of the estate now pressed in on him. He needed some kind of shell, some kind of refuge from the sunlight that threatened to dissolve him into the ether. His gaze fell on an object forgotten in the rosehip bushes by previous owners. It was a garden gnome, but not a cheap plastic one. An old ceramic figure made in the style of Ukrainian monumentalism. Massive shapes, a stern face, heavy stone-like hands. A kind of Boychukist gnome, standing in eternal guard beside a dried-up fountain. With no other choice, Edmund dove into the ceramic. Sofia stopped by the fountain, leaning against Mark's shoulder. "Mark, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, and in her eyes that same spark he had fallen for flickered again. "When he left me, I felt like he left something behind." "What do you mean?" Mark stopped and took her hands. His voice grew low and velvety. "Sofia, you're the bravest woman I've ever met. I'm not afraid of any ghosts as long as you're with me. You're beautiful, and I think I'm hopelessly in love with you." It was a perfect moment. Birds began to sing, the sun gilded the treetops. Sofia felt her heart fill with warmth, a wave of tenderness spreading through her body. And in that very second, a clear, melodic, incredibly aristocratic sound rang out from underneath her dress. Sofia gasped in horror, covering her face with her hands. "Oh no, Mark, I'm sorry. It stayed. The curse, it's mine now. Every time I feel something romantic, I'll do that." She braced herself for him to turn and run. Instead, she heard quiet laughter. Mark gently lifted her face by the chin. "You know, I'm an architect. I've spent my whole life working with perfect lines I'm honestly tired of. There's too much proper in this world. And that sound, that's your personal signature now. It's funny, it's weird, and it's absolutely unique. I love you, including your acoustic accompaniment." He leaned in and kissed her, and with every touch, the air around them filled with a series of tiny, joyful little pumps, like invisible elves popping champagne bottles. In the rosehip bushes, the garden gnome suddenly trembled. Edmund, trapped inside the tight ceramic prison, watched the scene. He wanted to scream with jealousy, wanted to unleash his signature sound to ruin the moment. But inside a ceramic body, there was no air. He was doomed to eternal, silent observation of someone else's happiness. Mark and Sofia walked toward the car, hand in hand. Edmund's estate remained behind, but Sofia knew now it wouldn't just be a hotel. It would be a place where every extra sound would be considered the Count's blessing. "By the way, Mark, why did you take this so calmly?" "Well," Mark started the engine, "my great-grandfather, Julian, once wrote in his diary, 'Never be afraid of the noise of the heart,
even if it comes from the wrong place. Seems like it runs in the family. The car drove away, and the garden gnome in the bushes seemed to frown ever so slightly. Its large ceramic eye glinted in the sun, whether from morning dew or from a single invisible tear.